Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to be looking at 5 different approach options for the chorus of On My Way Back to the Old Home. And for those of you who don't know, On My Way Back to the Old Home is a bluegrass standard. The progression of the song is often cited as bluegrass progression number 1. It is the go-to progression for a bluegrass song. And what I've been doing recently with some students is let's take a look at this progression and see how many different ways we can use the G major scale to go from chord to chord. Like I mentioned before, different approaches from chord to chord are really the way you can spice up your bass line to make it more interesting and just more colorful and more you in the end. So let's just first go over this G major scale. The notes we'll be using are the low G on the E string with our second finger, open A, the B with our first finger, C with our second, open D, E with our first, F sharp with our fourth, and then open G. Coming back down. So using just those notes, you can really have so many different options for going from chord to chord in this song. So the On My Way Back to the Old Home progression and bluegrass progression number 1 is, I'm going to play with repeated roots for now, which means we're going to play the root note of the chord twice before going to the next chord. G, C, G, D, G, C, G, D, G. That's it. So if you've listened to bluegrass before, you've probably heard a song with that progression. If not, actually hearing the song On My Way Back to the Old Home. So that repeated root transition approach is the first one of 5. For me, it's the bass line, no pun intended, for going from chord to chord. The idea of approach notes from chord to chord is generally they should be different than your vamp notes, which are roots and fifths, right? When we're hanging out on a G chord, we're just going G and D, root and fifth. To change it up and go to a next chord, if you repeat your root, you'll tell the listener you're moving. You hear that, right? So I like to use these repeated roots as my number 1 way to go from chord to chord. So let me play that bass line once without singing and once with. I'll do it with every version that way. So here's a repeated root from chord to chord. And note that we're using the high G, open G, not the low G. For songs that are at a bit of a faster tempo, which this one is, it's a little faster than we're playing it now, I like to keep it high, on the higher range of the bass, rather than the low E string. Kind of weighs it down sometimes at a faster tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm on my way back to the old home. That road winds on up the hill, but there's no light in the window that shines on that road where I lived. So you're hearing that repeated root going from chord to chord, indicating that we're moving. Let's start to think about some variations now. The first one is actually using the fifth of the chord to move to the following note or the target note. This kind of bucks this idea of changing it up for the transition note, but sometimes you might want to use the fifth as a transition note when it works. And it doesn't always work in this case. You'll see that when we go from certain chords to other certain chords, the fifth of the previous chord is the root note of the following chord. So it starts to feel a little awkward to me. So I don't use those ones. And then there's a little bit of a range issue going from the D chord back to G using the fifth. That's a big jump from that A to G. So when I'm thinking about melodic motion, I think, oh, let's move that A up an octave to create a much smoother line, you know? So let me play the fifth approach with the fifths that I feel are strong, that aren't the root of the following chord, and that octave change at the end. Once without singing, once with. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm on my way back to the old home. That road winds on up the hill, but there's no light in the window that shines on that road where I live. So now you're hearing those fifth transitions working where they can. When you're going from C back to G, if you use the fifth, it's going to be the same note as the root of the G, so I don't use it there. Likewise, when going from the G to the D, it just feels cumbersome and it's like it's giving away the next chord, so I stay away from those. So when playing that fifth approach, refer to that whole bass line I just played. Next, let's talk about our thirds, right? Each major chord that we're playing, G, C, and D, all have thirds. That second note I played, B in a G chord, E in a C chord, and F sharp in a D chord are our thirds of the chords. And those work really nicely from going from chord to chord. They're nice and colorful, and I'll play them through and they kind of work every time too. That's the beauty of them. The third of a chord, in this case, is never the root of the next chord, so I like using it. Here it is without singing. You wouldn't want to play a bass line entirely with third approaches, but they add really nice color every now and again. So here's that same third bass line with singing. I'm on my way back to the old home. That road winds on up the hill, but there's no light in the window that shines on that road where I live. Really nice, you know? Two more to go through. We're going to change up the fundamental structure of the bass line for these two examples. Each chord is going to be led with 2 repeated root notes. So for most of these chords, we have 4 notes total, right? So 2 repeated roots, and then we're going to use the 2 closest scale notes to our target note from either above or below, whatever direction we're coming from. And that'll be different on our last example. But remember our scale. This is the best way to remember this. We got our G major scale. That's going up from below, coming down. And that'll be coming from above, you know? So let me demonstrate it if you're a little bit confused. Here's this bass line with no singing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're using the 2 scale notes from either above or below, whatever direction we're coming from, and then go into our next chord. At the very end, we only have 2 notes per chord, so we're using the closest target note, or closest scale note, that is, to our target note. So here's that bass line again with singing. 1, 2, 3. I'm on my way back to the old home. That road winds on up the hill, but there's no light in the window that shines on that road where I live. You can see how these bass lines are interacting differently with the vocal melody. Different bass notes make the vocal melody sound different. So obviously we're mixing all these elements together when we're playing bass lines in a jam or a rehearsal or a gig. You don't want to play just one of these approaches, but work to mix them all together and incorporate them into your playing. The last example is similar to that, except we're only going to be coming from below. The approaches from below tend to be preferable in my eyes, so I really want to stress all the different approaches from below that you can use on this song. So here's the bass line without singing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them are the same as the previous example, some are different, right? Here it is with singing. 1, 2, 3. I'm on my way back to the old home. That road winds on up the hill, but there's no light in the window that shines on that road where I live. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video, y'all. If you want the tab and notation for this, sign on to Patreon if you're watching on YouTube. If you're already on Patreon, welcome. And stay tuned for more content, folks. Have a good day.